my daughter's wedding reception, my son-in-law picked up my late wife's sewing box from the gift table, turned it over once in his hands, and said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Who brings a beat-up old box to a wedding? This goes in the trash." My 8-year-old grandson watched from 3 feet away. I said nothing. I walked over, picked it up off the floor where he'd set it down like garbage, and tucked it under my arm. 3 days later, the antique restorer pried open the false bottom. His hands went still. What my wife had hidden in that box would cost my son-in-law everything he thought he'd built. Hello, and welcome. If this story means something to you, I'd ask you to hit that like button and subscribe. And if you want, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. My name is James Whitfield. I'm 67 years old, retired from 31 years as a structural engineer, widower. My wife Evelyn passed 2 years ago from pancreatic cancer. She was 59. We had one daughter, Amber, who is 34 now, and one grandson, Cooper, who just turned 8 and has Evelyn's same grey-green eyes and her habit of chewing his lip when he's thinking hard about something. The wedding was in April. Amber married a man named Griffin Cole, 38, finance director at a real estate development company in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'd met him 11 times before the wedding. I counted because each time I left feeling like I needed to wash my hands. He wasn't cruel exactly. He was just the kind of man who made you feel like you were costing him something by being in the same room. I drove down from Asheville with Cooper in the passenger seat because Amber had asked me to bring him early to help with setup. The sewing box was wrapped in brown paper on the back seat. It had belonged to Evelyn's mother, before it belonged to Evelyn, and before that, to Evelyn's grandmother. A small cedar box, dark with age, brass fittings gone green, a painted iris on the lid that had faded to a whisper. Evelyn had kept it on her dresser every day of our 31 years of marriage. When she got sick and knew she wasn't going to recover, she told me to give it to Amber at the right time. "You'll know when," she said. I thought a wedding was a right time. The reception was at a venue outside Charlotte, restored barn, string lights, the kind of event that costs more than my first house. Everything Griffin had touched in the planning was about impression. The food, the flowers, the seating chart arranged to put his business contacts at the front tables and family pushed to the sides. I noticed that. I filed it away the way I'd learned to do with things that bothered me and couldn't be changed. I'd set the wrapped box on the gift table near the entrance. Cooper was with me, holding my hand, a little overwhelmed by the crowd and the noise. That's when Griffin came through with 2 of his colleagues, drink in hand, already performing for them. He picked up the box without asking, peeled back one corner of the paper, and his expression did something I've replayed many times since. Not surprise. Contempt. Immediate and unguarded. "Who brings a beat-up old box to a wedding?" He laughed. "This goes in the trash." He set it on the floor near the table's leg. Not on the table, on the floor. Cooper looked up at me. His lip was trembling. I squeezed his hand once. I didn't raise my voice. Evelyn always said that anger expressed loudly is anger wasted. I walked over, picked up the box, held it at my side, and said quietly, "You might want to be more careful about what you throw away, son." Griffin had already turned back to his colleagues. He didn't even look at me. I stayed through the ceremony. I danced one song with Amber, who seemed not to have seen what happened, or chose not to. I hugged her at the end of the night and told her I loved her. I buckled Cooper into the back seat, and I drove back to Asheville with the sewing box on the seat beside me, the way I used to drive with Evelyn. That night I sat at the kitchen table and looked at it for a long time. There was something I'd never noticed before, or maybe never looked for. The box felt heavier than it should. Not dramatically, just slightly wrong. Like a book with more pages than the cover suggests. Evelyn had been a precise woman. She sewed with French knots she'd learned from her grandmother in Kentucky, measured twice, wasted nothing. If something was heavier than it should be, she'd made it that way on purpose. I called my old friend Roy the next morning. Roy Tatum, 71. Former cabinet maker, runs an antique restoration shop on Lexington Avenue in Asheville. I'd known him since the early 90s. He could look at a piece of furniture and tell you its decade, its county of origin, sometimes its family. I drove over Monday. He turned the box over in his hands under his work light, and he was quiet for a while in that way he has. Cedar, he said. Pre-war. See how the grain runs? They don't cut boards like this anymore. He ran a thumbnail along the bottom edge. And this base, it's too thick. A box this size, you'd expect maybe 3/8 of an inch. This is closer to 3/4. He reached for a small probe and felt along the underside seam. There was a soft sound, more of a breath than a click, and the false bottom swung open. Inside, wrapped in a piece of blue cotton that matched the dress Evelyn wore on our first date, were documents in clear plastic sleeves. The first was a life insurance policy. I'd known about that one. $150,000 named to Amber. But under it was something I had never seen. A property deed, recorded in Rutherford County, North Carolina. 7 acres and a farmhouse on the South Fork of the Broad River, transferred into a revocable living trust. The trust's name, the Cooper James Whitfield Trust, named for my grandson. Roy held the deed up to his light. This was filed 18 months ago, he said. James, did you know your wife owned property in Rutherford County? I did not. Under the deed was a handwritten letter in Evelyn's script. The careful, even handwriting she used when something mattered. I read it standing at Roy's workbench. James, if you're reading this, you gave the box to Amber like I asked, and something went wrong. Maybe nothing, I hope nothing, but I planned for wrong. The farm in Rutherford County belonged to my grandmother. When she died, she left it to me directly, not to my parents, to me. I never told you because you would have worried about the money it needed, and I didn't want you to. I had it quiet deeded into a trust for Cooper 2 years ago when I got the diagnosis. The value of the property is not what matters. What matters is this. Cooper is named sole beneficiary with you as trustee. Griffin Cole cannot touch it, cannot sell it, cannot borrow against it. I did not trust that man the first time I met him, and I have never found reason to change that. If Amber is happy, burn this letter and enjoy the farm yourselves someday. But if she isn't, if Cooper isn't safe, you'll know what to do. I love you. Keep your promises. Evelyn Roy sat down on his stool. He didn't say anything for a moment. Your wife, he finally said, was a very deliberate woman. Yes, I said. She was. I read the letter twice more in the car. Then I called my attorney. Patricia Okafor had handled our family's legal work for over a decade. Wills, the refinancing on the house, Evelyn's estate when she passed. She was in her early 50s, matter of fact, the kind of lawyer who reads documents the way a doctor reads x-rays. She asked me to come in Tuesday morning. She spread everything across her desk and was quiet for a long time. The trust is valid, she said. Properly filed, clear chain of title. Cooper is the sole beneficiary, you're the sole trustee. Griffin Cole has no legal relationship to this property whatsoever. She tapped the deed. What's the acreage worth? I didn't know. She looked it up. 7 acres, with a farmhouse on the South Fork of the Broad River in Rutherford County. Similar properties had sold in the past 18 months for between $400,000 and $600,000, depending on the condition of the structures. The farmhouse had been built in 1937. It had been maintained. Patricia looked up at me. James, this is a meaningful asset, and your son-in-law doesn't know it exists. My son-in-law threw the box it was stored in on the floor at his wedding reception. She was quiet a moment. Tell me about him. I told her what I knew. Griffin Cole, finance director, 38. A man who cared deeply about how things looked and very little about what they were. A man whose first instinct at his own wedding reception was to humiliate a 67-year-old widower in front of his grandson and then turn back to his colleagues like nothing had happened. Patricia made notes. There's nothing legally actionable there yet. But I'd like you to do something. Pay attention. Document. If there are concerns about Cooper's well-being in that household, I want to know. I left her office feeling something I hadn't felt since the funeral. Not hope exactly, more like clarity. Evelyn had built something. She'd built it quietly, in the last year of her life, when she was sick and tired and still thinking clearly enough to protect our grandson from a man she didn't trust. My job now was to understand what she'd seen. I started paying closer attention. Amber called most Sunday afternoons. I began listening differently, not for what she said, but for what she edited out. There were long pauses when I asked about Cooper, deflections when I asked about the house. Once she laughed at something and then went quiet mid-laugh, like someone had changed her channel. I'd been a father long enough to know the difference between a woman who was busy and a woman who was managing. Cooper and I had a standing arrangement. I called him every Thursday after school. He'd been doing that since Evelyn got sick, and we'd just kept it going. He was a talker on the phone, usually. He'd tell me about his science projects, about the kid in his class who could burp the alphabet, about whatever was bothering him. In May, he went quiet on me for the first time. "You okay, bud?" "Yeah." "How's school?" "Okay." I waited. Cooper always filled silences. He didn't fill this one. "Is Griffin home?" A pause. "He's in the other room." "Got it. We can talk Sunday when I call Mum." "Okay, Grandpa." He hung up faster than usual. I called Patricia the next morning. She referred me to a family attorney named Dennis Marsh, mid-40s, practiced in Mecklenburg County where Amber and Griffin lived, experience with custody and guardianship disputes. I drove down to Charlotte and sat in his office on a Tuesday afternoon. He listened to everything. Then he said, "Mr. Whitfield, what you're describing is a pattern. It may not rise to legal action yet, but I'd like you to document any specific incidents you witness or that Cooper discloses to you. Schools are required to maintain records of concerning behavior. If Cooper's teacher has any notes, they become relevant." He pulled out a legal pad. "Tell me about Cooper's relationship with you." Be the Coley, my sours, and about the summer Cooper spent at my house in Asheville after Evelyn died, how he'd slept in her sewing room because he said it smelled like her, how he'd asked me once if people could still hear you when they were gone, and I'd said I believed they could. Dennis looked up from his notes. "You have a strong relationship and a documented history of involvement in his life. That matters." He hesitated. "I want to be honest with you. If Griffin and Amber are functioning as a unit, contesting anything legally becomes complicated. But if there's a crack in that alliance, it changes things." I didn't know yet that the crack was already there. In June, Amber called on a Wednesday, which wasn't like her. Her voice had a controlled quality. The way it sounded when she was trying not to cry and was angry at herself for it. "Dad, I need to ask you something." "Go ahead. Did Mom leave anything, any property, any assets that I don't know about?" I was quiet. "Griffin found some paperwork," she said. "A trust document. He's been asking the county clerk's office questions. He thinks Mom had property she didn't tell anyone about, and he thinks it should be part of the marital estate." There it was. "The trust is Cooper's," I said. "Your mother set it up for her grandson. That's what the document says." Silence. "Griffin says a court might see it differently, that she set it up to cut him out. Your mother set it up 14 months before you got engaged, Amber." Another silence. Longer. "He wants to file something, a claim against the trust." "He can try," I said, "but I'd encourage you to talk to your own attorney before he does anything, separately from Griffin. Just you." "He's my husband, dead." "I know. And he's Cooper's stepfather, which means how this goes affects Cooper directly. That's worth thinking about on your own." She didn't answer, but she didn't hang up either, and that was something. I called Patricia that evening. She was not surprised. "He was always going to find out," she said. "The real estate records are public. A man like that, first year of marriage, he'd be taking inventory." She paused. "James, we need to move first. I'm going to file a petition to formalize your trustee status and seek court confirmation of the trust's validity before Griffin can cloud the title. Once a judge has affirmed the trust in a court proceeding, it's exponentially harder to challenge." "How long?" 60 days if we move fast. 90 realistically. And Griffin? He'll fight it. He's not stupid. He'll find an attorney who specializes in trust litigation, and he'll make arguments about undue influence, that Evelyn wasn't of sound mind, or that she was acting under your direction. None of those arguments strong given the timeline, but they take time to defeat. She paused again. James, there's something else I want you to prepare for. Men like Griffin, when they feel financially cornered, sometimes shift their tactics. Instead of going after the asset directly, they go after the trustee. They look for reasons to have you replaced. Incompetence, age, health, anything they can use to get a sympathetic judge to appoint someone else. I thought about Cooper on the phone, going quiet. Let them look, I said. The court filing was a Tuesday. Griffin's attorney, a man named Harlan Burke, who had a reputation for aggressive trust litigation, appeared at the first hearing with a thick brief, arguing the trust was the product of undue influence and that Evelyn had lacked testamentary capacity in the final months of her illness. He requested the trust be voided and the property folded into the marital estate. Patricia was ready. She submitted Evelyn's medical records from the months the trust was drafted and filed. She submitted testimony from Evelyn's oncologist, confirming that Evelyn's cognitive function was unimpaired throughout her treatment. Pancreatic cancer does not typically affect cognition the way some other conditions do. She submitted the notarized trust documents with the attorney's certification that Evelyn had been assessed for capacity at the time of signing. Then she submitted something that changed the room. A letter written by Evelyn, dated 8 days before the trust was filed, addressed to the family attorney who drafted it. In it, Evelyn explained in precise language why she was establishing the trust, what it was designed to protect, and what she feared. She named Griffin Coles specifically, not as a monster, as a man who valued money over people and who she believed would eventually see her grandson as a means to an end rather than a child to be loved. The judge read it twice. Harlan Burke tried to argue the letter was self-serving. Patricia pointed out that a letter written by a dying woman to her attorney, with no audience and no inheritance attached to the letter itself, was about as unself-serving as documentation could get. The judge confirmed the trust. Outside the courthouse, the light was the same light it always is after something important. Too ordinary, like the world hasn't gotten the news yet. Patricia was on her phone. I stood on the steps and thought about Evelyn sitting at some attorney's desk a year before she died, sick and tired, and writing a letter explaining why she didn't trust the man her daughter was going to marry. I thought about what that costs a person. To do that, instead of resting, Griffin's attorney filed for reconsideration. The judge denied it. What happened next, I hadn't expected. Amber called me 3 weeks after the ruling. It was a Sunday afternoon, our usual time, but she called an hour early and her voice was different. Not controlled, just quiet. He wanted me to testify, she said. Against you. Against Mom's trust. He drafted a statement for me to sign saying I believed Mom wasn't competent and that you'd manipulated her. I waited. I didn't sign it. Okay. He was very angry that I didn't sign it. A pause. Dad, I think I made a mistake. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't say anything that resembled it. Evelyn would have had something kind to say, something that opened a door without making Amber feel stupid for walking through it. I tried to think of what she would have said. Mistakes are how we learn what we actually believe, I said finally. What do you need? She started crying then. Not dramatically, just quietly, the way women cry when they've been holding it for a long time. What followed was 3 months of hard work. Amber retained her own attorney, a woman named Carol Beach, who had 20 years in family law. Griffin did not take the separation well. He contested everything he could contest, made accusations I wouldn't repeat because they didn't deserve repetition, and used Cooper as a pressure point in the ugliest way possible. Scheduling events to conflict with my visitation, coaching Cooper to say he didn't want to go to Asheville, things that Cooper himself later told his school counselor about. The school counselor had been keeping notes for 7 months. I didn't know that until Carol mentioned it. The notes documented Cooper's increasing anxiety, his difficulty concentrating, the way he'd begun apologizing before he spoke, like he expected to be corrected before he'd finished his sentence. His kindergarten teacher had noticed it. His second-grade teacher had escalated it to the counselor. No one had called me because no one had thought to, which was a gap I intended to fix. I went to see Cooper's teacher myself. She was a woman in her 30s who taught second grade at a public school in the Steel Creek area. She looked at me for a long moment when I came in and then seemed to make a decision. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, "Cooper talks about you a lot. He talks about calling you on Thursdays. He talks about calling you on Thursdays. He talks about the summer he spent in Asheville." "I hope that's a good thing." "It's the best thing," she said. "It's actually why he's okay." I drove back to Asheville that night and cried in my driveway for 10 minutes. Not grief exactly. Something closer to gratitude. The divorce was finalized in November. Amber got primary custody of Cooper. Griffin got visitation every other weekend and 2 weeks in summer. He did not get the farmhouse in Rutherford County. The trust was confirmed, the property was confirmed, and the judge included a note in the order that the trust had been established with evident care and foresight by a loving grandmother for the benefit of her grandson, and any subsequent attempts to relitigate its validity would be viewed with significant skepticism by this court. I read that sentence several times. Cooper came to Asheville for Thanksgiving. He slept in Evelyn's old sewing room again, which I'd turned into a proper guest room, but kept the pale blue walls she'd painted. The first morning, I made scrambled eggs, and he stood on the stool next to me the same way he always had with her, watching the pan and asking questions. "Grandpa," he said, "is the farm ours now for real?" "It's yours," I said, "when you're grown. Right now I'm keeping it safe for you. Can we go see it? Whenever you want." He was quiet for a moment, watching the eggs. "Mom said Grandma bought it a long time ago." "She did. Why didn't she ever tell anybody?" I turned down the heat the way Evelyn had taught me, low and slow. "Because she was protecting it. Some things you protect by keeping them quiet until the right time." Cooper chewed his lip. "Like the box." "Like the box." He nodded like that made complete sense, which I suppose it did. We drove out to Rutherford County the Saturday after Thanksgiving. The farmhouse sat back from a gravel road, grey-white clapboard, a porch that ran the full front width, a barn in the back that needed work, but was structurally sound. I'd had a contractor look at it in September. The river was visible from the east pasture, moving quiet and brown between the bare November trees. Cooper stood on the porch and looked out at all of it and didn't say anything for a while. "Think Grandma came here when she was little?" "I think so," I said. "I think her grandmother brought her here." He nodded again. He walked the length of the porch slowly, running his hand along the railing the way you do when you're memorizing something. I thought about Evelyn at 8 years old doing the same thing. I thought about her at 57, sick and clear-eyed, sitting at an attorney's desk writing a letter to a man she hoped would never need to read it. She'd bought this place back into the family with money she'd saved from 30 years of nursing. She'd told no one. She'd filed the deed on a Tuesday in October and driven herself home and made dinner and never mentioned it. That was who she was. A woman who loved loudly in private and planned quietly for the people she loved. The letter from Griffin came in December. He'd written it himself. No attorney header. Prison stationery from the federal facility where he was being held. A separate matter had emerged during the divorce proceedings. Irregularities in his company's accounts that the SEC had been watching for 2 years, and that the divorce discovery process had inadvertently accelerated. He was awaiting sentencing. The letter was short. I won't share all of it. But the last paragraph said, "I thought that old box was worthless." I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things. I folded it and put it in the drawer where I kept things I wasn't sure what to do with yet. Some mornings, Cooper's watch alarm goes off at 7. It was Evelyn's old alarm watch, a small gold thing she wore every day, and I'd sized it down for him and given it to him in September. He'd asked for it himself after I told him she'd worn it every day for 20 years. He comes out of the blue room and stands in the kitchen in his socks and asks what we're having. I always say the same thing, whatever you want. He thinks about it every time, like it might have changed. Then he says scrambled eggs, and I let him stand on the stool and do the stirring, And I try to remember to tell him when to stop the way Evelyn used to tell me. It's not the same as having her here. Nothing will ever be that. But there is something in a kitchen in the morning with a child who trusts you, with a river property 20 miles away that belonged to his great-great-grandmother, with a cedar box on the bedroom shelf that held what no one thought to look for. There is something in all of that that feels like she's still here, still working, still thinking 3 moves ahead. She always did. I kept my promise, Evelyn. He's home.